Number 20. In 2006, a government SWAT team raided Kent Hovind's Creation Science Ministry.
I believe Behemoth is the long-necked dinosaur. Now, there are 13 different long-necked dinosaurs, okay? There's the Brachiosaur, the Apatosaur, the Cetosaur. He's got the big seat, okay? There's the Blondosaur. You have to talk to her kind of slow, okay?
19. Kent and his wife, Jo, got arrested at gunpoint. Jo was dragged out of bed and not allowed to get dressed. This violent method of arresting a suspect is usually reserved for hardcore gang-related activity. It was disproportionate and a totally over-the-top display of force.
This one professor was getting very angry. I seem to do that to them. He said, "Mr. Hovind, you realize there are nearly 400 varieties of dogs in the world today?" I said, "Sir, I have no idea how many, but 400 sounds good." He said, "Do you mean to tell me that you believe all those dogs came from 2 dogs on Noah's Ark? You want me to believe that?" I said, "Sir, would you look at what you're teaching your students? You're teaching your students that all those dogs came from a rock."
18. They were both thrown in prison. Jo got released from jail a few years ago, but as of February 2015, Kent maintains his innocence from behind bars. 17. The prosecution of Kent Hovind was led by Michelle M. Heldmeyer, US Attorney, and J.D. Roy Atchison, Assistant US Attorney. In 1993, Judge Richard Kreidler of Jacksonville committed suicide when he was caught and charged with the crime of purchasing illegal pornographic materials. The following year, in May 1994, Michelle Heldmeyer, now the US Attorney, made national news when it was found that her husband, Joseph Heldmeyer, was on the same pornographic mailing list as the judge. He was never prosecuted. The Sun Sentinel, in an article titled "Attorney's Actions Warrant Probe" from May 14, 1994, poses the question, why? Was it because he's the husband of an assistant US attorney, Michelle Heldmeyer? Presumably.
I said, "Ma'am, do you believe in evolution?" She said, "Yes, I do. I'm a professor here at the university." I said, "Well, ma'am, would you please tell me then where we came from?" She said, "We came from a macromolecule." I said, "And where did that come from?" She said, "From the oceans, from the prebiotic soup." I said, "And where did that come from?" She said, "It rained on the rocks for millions of years." You could see it was slowly dawning on her. You know, I do believe I come from a rock. Yes, ma'am, you do.
16. Just a few days after Kent Hovind's trial, the Assistant US Attorney, J.D. Roy Atchison here, was caught, arrested and jailed for attempting to rape a 5-year-old. Number 15. At Kent's trial, Judge Margaret Casey Rogers, the presiding judge over the case, allegedly said, "Kent Hovind's crime is worse than rape." Did the judge know the prosecutor was a rapist? Number 14. To appeal the case, Kent paid $6,000 for a full court transcript. A court transcript is an unedited copy of every word spoken in the courtroom. To be valid, the appeal had to be filed within 12 months. The documents were held back for 16 months, making sure Kent missed the deadline for appealing his own case. 13. 4 months after the deadline and too late to file an appeal, Kent finally received the transcript, and somebody had tampered with it, removing the judge's words, "worse than rape." 12. 8 attendees of the court have signed an affidavit stating that they all heard Judge Margaret Casey Rogers declare Kent Hovind's crime to be worse than rape. Whoever tampered with the official court transcript is not known, but that fact alone, that it was tampered with, is enough to overturn the case. 11. And what hideous, monstrous crime deserves the title worse than rape? Structuring. Not murder, not genocide, no. Structuring. That's withdrawing any amount of your own money from your own bank account. I'm not making this up. If you withdraw money from your own bank more than twice in the last 10 years, then you're guilty of structuring. He served 8 years in prison for a nonsense made-up crime. 10. To recap, the assistant US attorney who prosecuted Kent was a rapist. The judge allegedly said Kent Hovind was worse than a rapist. The prosecutor was then found guilty of rape. Then the judge's statements about rape got removed from the court transcripts, and those transcripts were finally delivered to Kent 4 months past beyond the deadline for appeal. And that's only half of it. Do you still believe Kent Hovind was guilty? 9. 2 juries were dismissed until the guilty verdict was made. 8. Kent has been moved around from prison to prison 23 times in the last 8 years. Some say they're trying to get him killed, because the more you move a prisoner around, the more likely they are to share a cell with a violent inmate. 7. Allegedly, the IRS agent Scott Schneider seized over $42,000 from the Creation Ministry's safe, and then created a tax bill for the exact amount of money seized. 6. Judge Margaret Casey Rogers has a track record of handing out unjust and outrageous rulings against Bible believers. For example, she issued a contempt order against 2 school teachers for praying before they ate their food. The Washington Times reported, and the source is at the bottom of the screen there, that over 60 congressmen stepped in to show support for the teachers who were facing jail time, and that the judge was completely out of line, ruling against the First Amendment Constitution rights. She ought to have been dismissed as a judge at that point, but the case got settled out of court and the judge is still in office. This is outrageous. Number 5. The same judge, Margaret Casey Rogers, who allegedly misdirected the jury on the first trial and seems to have delayed the paperwork to stop the appeal, and may even have ordered the tampering with the court transcripts, has been selected to be the new judge in the upcoming trial. That is a massive conflict of interest. Number 4. A coordinated effort between the police force who authorised the SWAT team, the IRS agents who invented tax bills, the prosecutor who was a convicted felon, and the judge with a track record of issuing heavy-handed anti-Christian rulings can only require Congress to investigate, because unsound, unsafe, rough justice will continue to infect the system unless people are made aware. Number 3. While in prison, Kent Hovind has highlighted the fact that judges are allowed to invest in the prison industrial complex. They can hold stocks in private prisons for profit. Judges are incentivized to hand out longer sentences because while the prisons are full, the companies that run those prisons will be in profit. And a judge who has an investment in those stocks will take a dividend from that profit. It's a conflict of interest for a judge to profit from handing out longer sentences, and they ought to be banned from investing in prison-related stock. Number 2. An internet petition with over 19,000 signatures on it to free Kent Hovind was removed from the internet. We know who has the petition, but he won't release it. A link to a new petition can be found below this video. So the number 1 mind-blowing thing that happened to Kent Hovind is that he now faces a further 100 years in prison. The new trial is set for February 9, 2015. The trial could be moved to March. And what crime has he committed that deserves that sort of lengthy sentence? he mailed the Liz pendants on the title of his property. The government appears to be selling off all his assets, and his property is still in dispute. The Liz pendants informs any buyers that there's still legal dispute over the houses. Once again, they've made up a ridiculous crime of mail fraud to unjustly have him jailed for the rest of his life.
I mean,
well, and right before the break, we're talking with Dr. Hovind about
the ramifications and consequences that came from the IRS seizure and witch hunt against Mr. Hovind. And we were getting into what was being taken back from the IRS from the church, what they were repossessing, the donations, property. It looks like we got cut off from Ken again. We'll get him back here in just a second. And Ken, and we have a question from an emailer who asked to ask Kent about the time in solitary that he spent after knowing he was going to be released. I guess it says, great show. Please ask him to speak about the fact that they put him in solitary confinement when they knew he was going to be released. Shows how evil these people really are. That's from Cheryl.
Okay, and when he comes back and joins us, we will.
I mean, but just imagine that. You're in jail for 7 years.
9 years.
9 years.
9 years.
For what they call structuring, which is, taking money out of your own bank account in increments under $10,000 to people use it, or criminals who launder money or whatnot use it under $10,000. If you have $10,000 over transaction in a bank, it automatically alerts the IRS. And it's nonsense anyway. The law is nonsense to begin with.
Well,
he didn't even break those laws. He was taking money out of his account, and the IRS, with their selective enforcement, anybody can get caught on this. And we have word that Mr. Hovind's back again.
And I just want to thank Coach Dave Dobmeyer, PT Salt and Light Brigade. Coach Dave Dobmeyer really alerted us to Ken Hovind's plight, Dr. Hovind's plight.
Along with hundreds of listeners.
Oh, of course, yes, but Coach Dave has done so much. But go ahead and ask the question, and we're so glad he's back with us.
Yeah, Kent, before the break, you were talking about what the IRS came back for from the church. They wanted land back. They wanted donations back. What were they seeking?
Well, I think it's one of the most bizarre cases in decades in our country. From 1999 until 2002, we were buying some of the older houses in the neighborhood to expand for our dinosaur adventure land, because we're in Pensacola and we're landlocked. And the houses are built in the 50s, and all of them needed extensive repair. A lot of, so we were going to use them for staff housing until we needed them for space for our little theme park, Dinosaur Adventureland, which was, maybe just a little prejudiced, but the most fun place on planet Earth. Anyway, kids came from all over the world, right in my backyard, 5 acres. So because we had a lot of college students working for us, they'd come over whenever they had a couple hours free between classes, and we'd say, hey, here's $3,000 in the pickup truck. Go buy shingles, for this house, or go buy carpeting or sod or whatever. And so everything's fine. So about every 2 weeks, my wife would go down to the bank and get $9,500 because the pastor said try to keep it under $10,000. A couple times we had to get over 10, and then so the bank fills out a form, which is, I don't care, fill out any form you want. There's nothing illegal. It's church money spent on church bills. And so for 3 years, we were taking $9,500 a month, every 2 weeks out of the bank, which a bank we'd used for like 15 years, same bank account, same teller, And so then in 2002, we got credit cards and told the students, okay, we're going to trust a couple of you guys to go get stuff with credit cards instead. So we stopped using the cash in 2002. Then 2006, a SWAT team comes storming into my house, take my wife out of bed in her nightgown, wouldn't let her get dressed or give her a bathroom or put a robe on, took her down to the courthouse in her nightgown, handcuffed. She's 5 feet tall, a grandma, piano teacher. So anyway, I said, what is this about? They said, well, you were structuring 4 years ago. I said, what? Yeah, you took your money out of the bank in amounts less than $10,000. Yeah. So they said, oh, yeah, that's structuring. They charged me with 45 counts of structuring, and my wife, because over the 3-year period, there were 45 times where we withdrew under $10,000. And so my attorney and my wife's attorney, both, we went to trial. I thought you're supposed to when you're innocent. they both said, well, there's no crime here. We didn't do anything wrong. Don't even give a defense. So after the government got done with their dog and pony show for a week and a half, my attorney and my wife's attorney both said, we rest. There's no crime here, because the government never proved. They took out 2 withdrawals in one day that were over $10,000, but each withdrawal was under $10,000. Now, that would be structuring. You go in the morning, take out $9,500. Go in the afternoon, take out $9,500. Ha-ha. Structuring is 2 withdrawals in one day. Ours was 1 withdrawal every 12 days. This is not structuring. So my attorney was reading what the law says, that you have to find they took out over $10,000 with multiple transactions. And the judge changed the jury instructions after he got done and said, oh, no, if you find they took out less than $10,000, find them guilty, which, of course, is not what the law says. And of course, the jury says, well, yeah, obviously they took out less than $10,000. Who doesn't? So they came back with a guilty verdict. And then they said, the U.S. attorney put in a motion saying, we not only think he should go to prison for 10 years and my wife for 1 year, that money that was withdrawn, that's those structured funds 5 years ago and 4 years ago, they should belong to the government. We want to seize them. Well, that's when they found out that I don't own anything. I took a vow of poverty. Everything belongs to the Lord and belongs to the church ministry. So I don't have anything. I drive a church van. I live in a church parsonage. And so they said, well, we want to seize the church property. So the trustees of the church said, well, excuse me, no, you don't seize that. I mean, come on, that's not his. You can't seize our property for his bill. We demand a trial, a hearing. The jury never found that. And the judge let it sit on our desk for 7 months, and then with no hearing, no trial, no nothing, just ruled, okay, yep, you can seize the church property.
Wow. And
that's when the U.S. attorney went down and changed the names of the properties to say U.S. government, which they still say today. We bought 2 of them back to have a place to live. We had to pay back, buy their own property back.
It's ridiculous.
Just to get them to use it. It is so ridiculous. And then they said, then the U.S. attorney seized that bank account, and then a few weeks later I told you he flew to Detroit to have sex with a 5-year-old and got caught and hung himself in prison. That's the kind of people came after me.
And I contend, knowing, okay, folks, I mean, I know the backstory, or much of the backstory, as Dr. Hovind had explained, but I contend that this was selective prosecution based on your religious and even, shall I say, political, because it does kind of go into the political realm, your religious beliefs and political beliefs. I contend that, because basically, what about, I mean, everyone does this or is guilty of this to some extent, certainly not maybe 9,500, but what about people who take out multiple withdrawals, make multiple withdrawals that maybe rise to that pattern of structuring as defined by law? Certainly, that they could do that without even knowing it. So, I mean, what put them on, after 15 years or however many years you said, the same teller, the same bank? What was the straw? What was that tripwire, do you think, that caused that
Well, I don't know. I am pretty outspoken on things I believe, and certainly the evolution theory is the foundation for a lot of different political philosophies, like communism, Nazism, socialism, etc. They're all based on the idea that there is no God, that man makes the rules. We couldn't have communism if it weren't for the evolution theory. That's what motivated Karl Marx to start his whole theory. There's no God. We decide right and wrong. And so because I speak out against evolution, and the founders of this country had a very simple philosophy. They said, hey, guys, we hold these truths to be self-evident. All men are created equal. They're endowed by their creator with certain rights. And I ask people all the time, where do rights come from? Do rights come from government, or do rights come from God, the creator? Do you have the right to get married? Well, yeah. Well, who gives you that right? Does the government give the right to get married? Why do we have a marriage license anyway? There was no such thing. Abe Lincoln didn't have a marriage license. No such thing until after the Civil War. That's another long story. But the point would be, I mentioned some of these things in my seminar, and I'm sure my teaching that God made the world and he owns it and his word is correct, that is a threat to these guys who want their one world government, like Pinky and the Brain. You know, they want to rule the world. And so my teaching is an obstacle to that, I guess. You know, I tell people, look, if you're rubbing the cat the wrong way, maybe the cat needs to turn around.
Think about that.
I'm not rubbing it the wrong way. The cat's backwards. Turn him around. Everything will be fine.
I love that. All right. Now, Joe got a question from a listener here that
we have a few questions from the listeners here.
Well, it relates to your
about
time.
your incarceration. This is from Cheryl, and she says, "Great show. Please ask Kent to speak about the fact that they put him in solitary confinement when they knew he was going to be released. This shows the evil, how evil these people are. God bless." From Cheryl.
What's up with that?
I was moved 30 times while I was in prison. I don't know if that's a record, but I think it probably is. I had never met anybody who was moved as much as me. 30 moves while I was in prison, in federal prison. Okay. When I was due to be released in February of 2013, a year and a half ago, they came with a new charge of mail fraud because I've simply mailed a letter to the courthouse, county courthouse, saying, hey, there's still litigation pending on that property. Don't sell it without letting the people know, hey, I'm going to fight this. There's still litigation pending. It's called the lis pendens, which is Latin for litigation pending. Okay. Because I mailed that letter, they wanted to charge me with mail fraud, which carries 20-year sentence. Here I've already served 8. I'm due to go home. So they took me out of federal prison camp and put me in county jail, which is the armpit of the whole place, and left me there for a full year, my last year, for mailing a letter to the courthouse. There's nothing private or secret about this. And the letter, and you're supposed to warn people, hey, there's litigation pending. It's all it is a notice. Let the buyer beware, there's litigation pending.
Right.
The day they took me to trial on that, they dropped the charges. They dropped all the charges the day of trial. So it was obviously just a hassle thing, give this guy a hard time, keep him in county jail. I don't understand these people at all. Their thinking process just boggles my mind, how anybody can be so cruel, mean, or maybe it's just stupid. I don't know. But part of the problem is very simple. Judges and prosecutors and lawyers and congressmen are allowed to own stock in the prison system.
Yeah, let's talk about this.
Well, the governor of Mississippi for many years is Haley Barbour, okay? He owns thousands of acres in Yazoo City, Mississippi. He has a 99-year lease, leasing that property to the federal government to build a prison. And I was there in that prison, in solitary confinement, my last month of prison. Okay. So what do you think the governor of Mississippi, who owns that prison land and has a lease for 1,000 years, does he have an incentive to try to keep the prison full so they can make their payment? His son, Haley Barbour Jr., is the chief federal judge in Jackson, Mississippi. Do you think there's any incentive to keep it full? Of course, they'll deny it, I'm sure, but to me, that's double dipping in anybody's book. Here we're paying you to make laws or to judge laws, and then the longer you lock people up, the more money you make on the backside.
Yeah.
I might not be the smartest man on the planet, but that sure looks wrong to me.
I agree, and the privatization of prisons, in Congress, we know that they're allowed to be involved in insider trading, even though they say that they've now signed a bill, but it was watered down by some of the representatives so that they can continue. Just like the stock crash in 2008, a lot of Congress members, if you look at the stock activity, withdrew. It was a ridiculous amount of money between the House and Senate, and were able to avoid the calamities of the financial crash that happened with the stock market. Now, with the prison systems, you're saying that are they getting payoffs for keeping quotas?
Seems to me, Dr. Hovind, I mean, that it's in their best financial interest to keep those prison stocks, right?
Well, exactly right. The more people they keep in there, the more money they get on their investment. some people own stock not just in the land, like the situation in Mississippi, but some the food. Who supplies the food for the prison? The transportation system. There's an entire system of buses running across the country, moving prisoners around, taking them to halfway houses, to transfer centers like the one in Tallahassee or the one in Atlanta. I've been to most of them. And who owns that land? Who owns that bus? It's a private company that transports prisoners around. Who's paying these guys, and who profits from this? All you got to do is say, things are kind of slow this month. Not many prisoners are moving. Let's just move 500 men. Move these guys from here over to here.
Right.
Well, that keeps the money coming in. So I think it's very simple. No one involved in law enforcement at any level, whether it's making the laws or enforcing the laws or judges, should be allowed to own stock or profit from the prison system. Who pays for? Where do they buy the clothes that the prisoners wear? We all had uniforms. Well, who owns the company that makes those uniforms?
It's like the mafia.
Who owns the phone system?
Yeah.
It's like
it's 23 cents a minute to make a phone call.
Really?
What does it cost you to run your call? Somebody's making a fortune off of this.
It reminds me of the mafia stories where you see them come in and take over a business, and they say, "Hey, we got a new guy for you for your dishes. We got a new guy for your security system," and then they, make people business owners. This is how they extort their money. Use the people that they bring in, and skim off the top and whatnot. But it is just pure corruption and greed, and their bottom line is more important than the life of a person who's in prison either legitimately or illegitimately. That is not a concern of theirs. Guilt or innocence is not something that actually really is important in our justice system anymore. And, recently there was a story about a judge who was caught, and I believe he's been thrown off the bench and is going to be tried because he was, what you're describing, there was a home for troubled boys and minors, and he had sending double the amount of kids to this troubled camp than every other judge in the county. Well, he was getting kickbacks for every child he sent there. And this is what, you're describing, only on a grander scheme.
It is so huge. Is it in Congress' best interest to pass a law, knowing a lot of people are going to break the law, like the whole war on drugs? I've never taken drugs and never will, okay? But if I was king, first thing I would do is say, okay, y'all do what you want to do, as long as you don't injure anybody. You want to drive on the highway when you're drunk, that's a different story. But if you want to stay home and drink or take drugs, that's your business. Go for it. And there shouldn't be prison for that. And like I said, I've never taken drugs and won't. But if we stop the war on drugs and at the same time stopped all welfare, you want to take drugs? Fine. You're going to get sick. You want to ruin your health? Fine. Go for it. You want me to pay for it? No. Now that's different. You can't go to work anymore? Well, then go hungry. Or go on. Let somebody who wants to volunteer to pay you to eat or buy your food, like churches did for decades. That's different than forcing everybody to pay with welfare, which is really mandatory. You don't pay your tax; they come get you at the point of a gun. So see, that welfare is very different than charity.
Yes.
If it's mandatory collection of taxes to pay for somebody to not work because they ruined their health for taking drugs, that ought to be stopped. It's like, duh, stop all welfare and forget the war on drugs. Let people do what they want to do. But then just don't pay for it.
Exactly. Now, when you were during your 9 years or your time behind bars, how many of the people with you were in prison for non-violent offenses or drug offenses, actually, or drug trafficking or whatever that? I mean, was it the majority?
Right. I think I've heard numbers. I think it's 97% are in for non-violent crimes. It's a very small percentage. I'm sure somebody's done studies, but it's a very small percentage. Even then, I could shut down the prison system in a few hours. In the Bible, there's no prison system.
That's right.
The heathen had prisons. The Romans, the Egyptians, the Greeks, everybody had prisons. But God's word was very clear. Guys, if somebody commits a certain crime, you give them a beating. For other crimes, you give them a fine. If you steal my sheep, you pay back 4 sheep. Well, for some crimes, you simply get executed. You know, if somebody rapes your daughter, she does not need to pay for his groceries for the next 20 years and worry about him getting out. She needs to watch him get executed somehow, lethal injection or whatever, and then go spit on his grave if she needs to heal up emotionally. That's just common sense 101. So for certain, I asked over 1,000 guys, I think, in prison. There was a different places. I said, guys, if you were given an option after you're found guilty, no question, you're guilty. And the judge said, look, you want 5 years or 20 lashes? Which would you take? All of them said the 20 lashes. I said, okay, which would be cheaper? Well, 20 lashes. Which would be better for your family? Well, 20 lashes. I go home, I'm sore for a week, and then I go back to work. I don't lose my job. I don't lose my family. And I said, which would be a better deterrent to not do it again? Well, the 20 lashes. I'm not going to do that again. If the judge says next time you're in here for this is 25 lashes, okay. Well, then don't do it again. It's just common sense 101. God's word, which is perfect, Psalm 19, Psalm 12, Psalm 119, 165. The law of the Lord is perfect. Verse 9, I'm sorry. Anyway, God's word is perfect, and God never authorized prisons at all. And I'm embarrassed. It took me so long as a Christian to figure that out. It was right there the whole time, but I didn't see it. I was one of those who was guilty of hollering tough on crime, tough on crime. Well, tough on crime is not the same as longer prison sentences and building more prisons. No, shut the whole system down. Give everybody a fine, a beating, or execute them, and we're done. The problem is the politicians that are making money off of this don't like that idea, and they're the ones passing the laws. So ask the people running for Congress this election. They're all out campaigning. Ask them, what's your position on the prison system? And I think you'll be surprised. Ask them point blank, do you or your family members own stock in the prison system? Do you profit from the uniforms? Do you profit from the food, from the transportation, from the land? The federal courthouse here in Pensacola, Florida, is on leased land, privately owned land that has a lease. I don't know who owns the property. Somebody needs to find out. And I bet it'd be traced back to some politician somewhere who owns the property and leases it for a 99-year lease to the federal government, who has the ability to collect money at the point of a gun to pay their lease. So you talk about job security. It's insane.
Do you know if the records are public? If one were to do enough digging, would they be able to connect the congressmen, the elected representatives?
Well, you're talking shell companies and such, but the
Okay.
records are public. We do that all the time, or have done that, in the past. But I'm sure you're dealing, Kent, you're dealing with layer upon layer of secrecy and shell companies, and much greater than the crime of structuring, for crying out loud, I believe. But
it could be. You could do a FOIA request, Freedom of Information Act, but you're probably right that some of them may have it covered with layer after layer. I heard that Rockefeller, in 1973, one of the I think it was Governor Nelson Rockefeller, maybe, he told people, his friends, he said, look, start buying stock in prison system industries. They call it prison industries, because we're going to start a war on drugs. And when the war on drugs started, the prison system exploded. It increased. I think the population of America increased 100% since then, and the prison system increased 700% or something like that. It's unreal. He not only saw it coming, he caused it to come. We're going to start a war on drugs. Yeah, right. You're going to start a way to pad your pocket is what you're going to do.
And isn't that interesting, Dr. Hovind? And we could spend hours talking about this. This really goes to one of my favorite topics, as I like to dissect. I'm an investigator by profession, 30 years in the investigative field, and Joe, not quite 30 years. He's not, but I guess this is one of my favorite topics, because to dissect the current social, what's going on socially, the war on drugs, isn't it something that right after the counterculture of the 60s, well, the late 50s, early 60s, bringing in LSD, into this country, and bringing in the drugs into this country, the bands, or the rock groups, and then all of a sudden you've got the problem introduced, and then the solution is ready-made, that we're going to have this war on drugs. You've got the Elvis Presleys of the world, high all the time, yet fighting this war on drugs with Nixon, the famous photo of Nixon. But it's the Hegelian dialectic that we're seeing here that's advancing toward this new world order and one world government, as you point out in your material.
Well, yeah, certainly. The Bible predicts there's Satan at the end of time is going to try to have a one world government. For people who follow this and really study this New World Order teaching, this 1,000 points of light that George Bush kept sneaking into his speeches all the time, it's all part of the big major plan. For folks who get nervous about this one world government, which is racing toward us, by the way, they should read Psalms chapter 2. It's a great tranquilizer. Why do the heathen rage? The people imagine a vain thing. The Bible says God sees their plans and he's laughing at them. So if you're a child of God, we need to, fear not. 365 times in the Bible it says, fear not. I think that's because he wants us to fear not. Read the book, do what he says, win souls. We're not going to get out of here alive anyway. So let's go win somebody to the Lord and teach them to go do the same. And to me, get busy with evangelism and discipling and exactly what Jesus told us to do. We're so distracted on the dumbest thing. And the people that have all their treasures laid up on earth, of course, they're really worried about what's coming. But if you lay up treasures in heaven where moth and rust do not corrupt or thieves do not break through and steal, this earth doesn't mean nothing to you. Let it go.
I'm going to move this question right up to the top of the line, Dr. Hovind. And for obvious reasons, I think you're going to understand this. And man, wow. This is from Gerald in California, listening live. Gerald is facing 5 years in prison right now. He'll know his sentence next week. He's got 2 small children, a wife of 2 years, and I won't get into the crime it's financial in nature. He's despondent. He's saying that just listening to you tonight, Dr. Hovind, is giving him hope that he can survive his incarceration in a federal penitentiary. He's asking us to ask you if you could speak to him. How did you survive? What did you do to prepare your family before? I mean, my heart goes out to this man. Look, I don't know if he's guilty, innocent. It doesn't matter to me. But just I'm just reading this, and I mean, Dr. Hovind, can you speak to this, to Gerald in California facing this incarceration?
Well, I sure can. I would encourage. Half the Bible is written from prison or captivity or people who experienced one of those. Daniel hauled off to captivity and made a eunuch. Look that up. He spent 70 years in that working for the guy who did it to him. Working for the enemy. And Joseph spent 13 years in prison for absolutely nothing. He did nothing wrong, and he spent 13 years in prison. So it happened to John the Baptist. What on earth did he do wrong? He simply preached the truth. Hey, king, you shouldn't have that woman. That's your brother's wife. Knock it off. And they cut off his head. So one of the things that really inspired me during my prison time, multiple things, but one was I kept really busy reading, writing, researching. I wrote 37 books from prison, and that makes your time fly. And I did a lot of Bible studies, helping others, led men to the Lord. You get busy. Don't get despondent over your situation. Go help somebody else, because you're going to be in a room full of despondent men who need encouragement. And keep fighting your case if there's any hope to fight that, and go for changes in the law. This is crazy. But winning people to the Lord and discipling them was probably one of the greatest helps for me to use. And another thing that really helped me was realizing so many people have it so much worse. Johnny Erickson Tada, she's got Johnny and Friends show. She dove into shallow water when she was 17 years old, broke her neck. She's been paralyzed from the neck down for, I don't know, she's a little older than me. I would guess 65 or so. So nearly 50 years in a wheelchair, barely able to move her arms. And she does pictures and so whenever I, see, I don't know if you know this, but whenever I, do you know what a Persecutors is? Persecutors is a got despondent, in prison, I would just simply wiggle my toes and think, boy, I bet Johnny wishes she could do this. It could be so much worse, so much worse. So there's always people that have it a whole lot worse. And so, but to me, filling my days every day, I would, get up early and stay up late and get as much done as I could. I read, I think, 1,800 books while I was in prison. I wrote, 37 of them. And do Bible studies. There's always somebody else who's worse off. So many famous Bible characters spent time in prison. You're going to be in real good company, and you're going to be fine. Actually, you're probably going to look back on it as one of the best times. It's going to be hard, but it's also going to be wonderful in 1,000 ways. So relax, calm down. You'll be fine.
Wow.
Just say, okay, Lord, this is it. I'm going to make the best of it.
I do want to ask you, the time is running so short, we only have about 10 minutes left. Your prison ministry, something I think you should be extremely proud of, and I know you are. freekenthovind.com, and you've got Kent's Converts. Where do you stand with that right now? And go ahead and speak to your prison ministry, your outreach program for prisons.
Okay, well, one of the really dumb rules they have in our system is that if you're a convict, if you're a felon, you cannot correspond with other felons, which I think is silly and stupid and ought to be changed. But, hey, that's the rule. So even though I led a lot of men to the Lord in prison, I cannot write them letters. So several people said, well, hey, we'll write them letters. We'll encourage them. We'll send them Bible studies. We'll, be their friend, blah, blah, blah. And so Kent's Converts is something somebody else does for me to keep track of. They write letters and encourage them. And some of those that I led to the Lord are also leading people to the Lord in prison. And so that's really helpful. And one of the great joys in life, of course, is having children and watching them grow. It's just God designed that part of life. You grow up, and then pretty soon you have your own children. Well, it's the same thing spiritually. Once you get born again, that's wonderful, and then you grow and read the Word, that's wonderful, and then you reproduce, make spiritual babies. So that's the greatest joy in the world that I know of. And so I would encourage people, if you're a Christian, okay, go get somebody else saved. If you can't get a big one, get a little one. Find somebody who will listen. And once you get someone converted and they're looking up to you as spiritual daddy, it's all of a sudden a whole different world. Wonderful.
We have another question here from Helen. She just wants to know how your health has been since your release from prison.
Well, today is the oldest I've ever been, and I feel fine. I broke my back years ago, and I've had whiplash twice. Plus, I slide on it a lot. Baptists not only believe in backsliding, we practice it. But other than back pain almost constantly, I feel fine. I stay very busy, and God's been good. You can watch my program. I don't even have too many gray hairs yet. So at 62 and a half, I guess that's good. All in all, the prisons, they move me all the time, and especially the dark, damp, solitary confinements. Why they did that to me, nobody knows. I still don't know why. But I did pick up some kind of cough that I've had for several years that I can't seem to shake, and I've tried everything. I'll just live with it, I guess. It doesn't bother me. I'm sure it bothers those who have to listen to me. Sorry about that, but that's all I can do.
Well, Dr. Hovind, thank you so very much. God bless you, and may the Lord keep you well, and safe travels as you travel to Columbus, Ohio. Those around Columbus, let's fill up the High Street Baptist Church, November 7th and 8th. Fill up the venue in Scranton as well the following week. Dr. Hovind, thanks so much for being on our show, and certainly we hope you can come back again and we could talk more, have a conversation about current events and what have you.
Sounds great. Thanks for having me.
All right, Doctor. God bless. Thank you.
All right, bye.
Folks, that was Dr. Hovind, Dr. Kent Hovind. His website is 2Peter3, the number 2, the word Peter, the number 3.com. That's 2Peter3.com.